Imagine this. You're 7 years old, curled up in a corner of your childhood bedroom, your breath trembling, your fingers clenched around a stuffed animal whose seams are splitting at the edges. You've just said something you didn't mean, something angry, something childish. Your mother stands in the doorway, silent. Her eyes aren't furious. They're disappointed. That unbearable quiet sets in. Then, without words, she turns and walks away. And in that moment, you learn something that no one ever puts into words. Love, real love, grown-up love, is conditional, not spoken, not defined, but deeply felt. Now fast forward, you're 28, sitting across from someone you once believed would be your forever. You've sacrificed, compromised, tried, but one evening, they look you in the eye and say, I can't do this anymore. I love you, but that is a blade wrapped in velvet. It tells you love has terms, even if they're unspoken. And again, like a chord struck twice in the same symphony, you feel it. There are invisible contracts beneath every I love you. Contracts no one acknowledges until they're broken. And yet, we all believe in the myth. Unconditional love. We whisper it like a prayer. We sew it into our lullabies, our wedding vows, our parenting books, our spiritual rituals. The idea that someone, somewhere, will love us no matter what. Not because we earn it, not because we behave, not because we're useful or good or beautiful or sane, but just because we are, because we exist. That's the dream, right? But here's the fracture line, glowing in the dark. If love is truly unconditional, why is it so easily withdrawn the moment we become difficult, different, or dangerous to love? Why do so many people live in silent terror that the love they depend on could disappear the moment they stop being who others need them to be? We say we want to be loved unconditionally, but can you really love someone without needing anything back? No safety, no respect, no honesty, no loyalty? If so, what separates love from self-erasure? And if you believe you love someone unconditionally, ask yourself this. Would that love survive betrayal, abuse, years of indifference? Would it survive the unraveling of everything you thought they were? Here lies the great contradiction, maybe even the great lie. We tell ourselves that love, true love, has no strings. And yet, in our lived experience, love is made of strings. Invisible, yes, but tight, twisting, tangled. Why do we feel so guilty, so ashamed, when we can't keep loving someone who's hurt us? Why do we pretend parents always love their children, even when they don't? Why do we cling to the notion that our worth is proven when we are loved, unconditionally, as though that's the highest form of devotion? And here's the cruel twist. In our pursuit of unconditional love, we often abandon ourselves. We tolerate what wounds us. We become pliable, palatable, pure. We twist into forms others will not leave. We stay lovable by becoming less ourselves. So what are we really seeking? Security? Immortality? A loophole through the pain of abandonment? Or something even deeper, a rebellion against the inevitability of loss? And what if this whole idea, that love should be unconditional, isn't just misguided, but damaging? A beautiful poison? A myth forged to keep us compliant, quiet, and ashamed when love fails us? Because it will fail us. Not because people are cruel, but because people are human. Because every heart has a threshold. Because even saints turn away eventually. Because unconditional love, as we dream it, may not exist outside of fantasy, folklore, and maybe, just maybe, the pages of a child's storybook. And yet, you still long for it, don't you? The part of you that's tired of earning love like wages. The part that wants to collapse into someone's arms and not worry if you're too much, too broken, too anything. The part of you that says, please, just love me anyway. But what if chasing unconditional love is a trap? What if the very pursuit of it is why so many people stay unloved, misunderstood, or used? What if the love you crave has always come at a hidden cost, one you've paid without realizing? We're about to go deeper, beneath the dream, beneath the shame, into the hidden architecture of human affection and need. You may never look at love the same way again. Are you ready? Because to question unconditional love is to question the very thing we believe redeems our humanity. Love is a language everyone thinks they speak fluently until the words collapse in their mouths. Until the person they trusted most walks away. Until the promises rot under pressure. Then comes the quiet horror. I thought love was supposed to be unconditional. But what if we've misunderstood love from the very beginning? To unravel the myth, we must journey backward into the strange machinery of the human psyche, into the shadowy corners of need, fear, and identity. This is not just about romance or childhood wounds. This is about the way your soul was shaped long before you had words for it. Let's start with a truth few dare speak aloud. love, for most people, is a negotiation. Even as infants, we learn quickly that affection comes with rules. Smile, and the adult lights up. Cry too long, and they grow irritated. Do well in school, get praise. Misbehave, get coldness or punishment. The lesson repeats until it hardwires into our bones. Be good, be lovable, or be alone. Carl Jung called this process the formation of the persona, the mask we wear to gain approval and avoid rejection. But what is the cost of that mask? We trade authenticity for attachment. The child who wants to scream learns to smile. The teenager with rage in their chest learns to perform politeness. And the adult? The adult forgets they ever wore a mask at all. They call it maturity. But is it? As we grow, our hunger for connection is rarely met with acceptance. It's met with conditions. And in that quiet, aching gap between who we are and who we must be to receive love, the myth of unconditional love is born. Because the truth is unbearable, love is rationed, measured, contingent. Arthur Schopenhauer argued that human desires are a form of suffering, that we chase illusions because we are incapable of being whole without them. Love, he believed, is a biological trick, nature's ploy to keep the species going, not some transcendent force. So if love is a trick, a transaction, what does that mean for your longing to be loved no matter what? It means you were programmed to need what might not even exist. A cruel irony, like thirst in a desert with no water. But don't mistake this for cynicism. This isn't about giving up on love. It's about understanding its shape, its source, its shadows. Because the real threat is not that unconditional love doesn't exist. The real threat is how the belief in it distorts your sense of self. When you believe that real love requires no boundaries, no reciprocity, no limits, you start to measure your worth by your ability to endure. You tolerate betrayal and call it devotion. You abandon your needs and call it loyalty. You erase yourself and call it compassion. In doing so, you become what Nietzsche called a slave to virtue. Not because you are good, but because you are terrified. Terrified of being unchosen. Terrified of not being needed. Terrified of what you might see in the mirror if no one was there to reflect love back at you. Nietzsche warned of this moral self-deception, the idea that our greatest sacrifices are noble, when in fact they are often rooted in fear, in the hunger to be needed, in the desperation to be seen. This is the danger of the unconditional love myth. It makes martyrs out of lovers, saints out of victims. It tells you that the more you give, the more worthy you become, even if you are giving away pieces of yourself. And yet, you still crave it. Why? Because from a psychological lens, unconditional love symbolizes safety. The infant brain equates love with survival. To be unloved is to die. That primal terror never fully leaves you. Even as adults, we mistake approval for protection. We believe if someone loves us unconditionally, then we are safe from loneliness, from failure, from the unbearable burden of being unknown. But Jean-Paul Sartre reminds us, hell is other people. Why? Because when your identity is built on being seen and loved by others, you are always at their mercy, their mood, their triggers, their absence. You exist in reflection, and love becomes a performance you hope wins applause. So where does this leave us? With a paradox that tears at the fabric of the soul. You cannot be fully free and unconditionally loved at the same time. Because freedom means the right to change, to disappoint, to evolve beyond the role someone once loved you for. And unconditional love demands that none of those things ever jeopardize your bond. So we split ourselves, the part that yearns to be wild and the part that yearns to be held. The truth of who we are and the version we hope will be enough. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "The surest way to work up a crusade in favor of some good cause is to promise people they will have a chance of maltreating someone, to be able to destroy with good conscience." Now imagine that not in a political sense, but in love. How often do we stay with people who damage us because we've been told that walking away is selfish? How often do we suppress our instincts in the name of proving we're good enough to be loved without limit? Maybe the most dangerous myth isn't that unconditional love exists. Maybe it's that it should. We've created an ideal that not only doesn't match human nature, it demands the sacrifice of authenticity to maintain. And when we inevitably fail to live up to it, we blame ourselves. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Maybe I should have given more. Maybe love just doesn't work for people like me. But what if it's not you? What if you're living under the weight of a false ideal? One that's quietly corroding your sense of worth, your capacity for boundaries, your ability to love in ways that are fierce, mutual, and free. We haven't even begun to unpack the consequences of this illusion, but they're everywhere, etched into marriages, friendships, families, even nations. What happens when an entire society builds its emotional blueprint on a fantasy? We're about to find out. You think you're making a choice to stay in a friendship that drains you, to forgive again, to smile when you're unraveling. To say, it's okay, when it never was. But what if you're not choosing at all? What if you're acting out a script, a deep, inherited narrative carved into the walls of your mind, written not by your conscious self, but by everything you've absorbed since you were a child? A script that says, if you love purely enough, unconditionally enough, the pain will stop. This is where the myth of unconditional love becomes dangerous. Not in the abstract, not in poetic daydreams, but in the way it quietly distorts your entire emotional ecosystem. Let's start with the personal. You stay in a relationship that has long since become a graveyard for your truth. You stay because leaving would make you feel like a failure, like a traitor to love, because you've been taught that real love endures all things, even slow, daily deaths. You tolerate patterns that chip away at your dignity. You forgive apologies that are never followed by change. You call it grace, but deep down, you know it's survival. You're afraid of being called selfish, difficult, unforgiving, afraid that the moment you enforce a boundary, the love will vanish. And often, it does. And so you make a quiet calculation. Better to bleed than to be abandoned. That's the consequence of worshiping unconditional love. It teaches you that your pain is the price of staying worthy. But it doesn't end there. The implications ripple outward into families, cultures, ideologies. Take the parent who says, I love you no matter what, but punishes authenticity. The child becomes a contortionist, twisting their identity into what is lovable. Straight instead of queer, obedient instead of curious, silent instead of emotional. They grow up believing that love demands erasure, that their truest self is a threat to connection, that being loved means being smaller than they really are. Or consider the devout believer, clinging to a spiritual tradition that preaches divine, unconditional love, yet punishes questioning, doubting, evolving. What kind of love says, you are accepted unconditionally, unless you change your mind? What kind of God needs you to suffer to prove your devotion? Even in the political realm, we see the myth at work. Citizens told to love their country no matter what, regardless of corruption, injustice, or violence. Patriotism becomes a kind of abusive loyalty. You are told to stay silent, to support, to love your nation unconditionally. And if you question it, you are a traitor. This is what happens when unconditional love becomes the gold standard. It stops being about love and becomes a demand for self-abandonment. Let's look at the brain. Neurologically, our survival circuits are built for attachment. The limbic system, the emotional brain, lights up in the presence of connection and flatlines during rejection. That's not metaphor. That's biology. Psychologist Naomi Eisenberger discovered that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Your body doesn't distinguish between a broken arm and a broken heart. It just knows something essential is missing. Now imagine a belief system that says the only real love is unconditional. And imagine your nervous system realizing that it cannot maintain that kind of love or receive it. What happens? Chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, codependency, shame that clings like smoke. You begin to experience love not as a safe harbor, but as a high-stakes game, a performance, a tightrope walk. You overgive. You become hyper-attuned to others' moods. You apologize before anything even goes wrong. You anticipate abandonment at every turn. And so, unconsciously, you sabotage or cling. Your nervous system is stuck in survival mode, not intimacy. That's the trap. The myth of unconditional love creates conditional self-worth. And in a culture that commodifies affection, dating apps, social media, curated personas, this trap becomes almost inescapable. You are taught to believe that love is limitless, but only if you keep proving yourself. A cognitive dissonance forms. On the surface, you are loved no matter what. But underneath, be more attractive, be less needy, be exceptional, be convenient, whatever it takes. It's a war between the soul and the mask, and the body keeps score. You might feel exhausted but not know why. You might struggle with boundaries but can't explain it. You might chase emotionally unavailable people, not out of masochism, but because your nervous system recognizes that pattern as home. Love that makes you earn it feels more real, because it's familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it isn't. This is why so many people confuse intensity for intimacy. Why they say, I don't know why I'm drawn to them. I just feel it in my body. They're not feeling love. They're feeling a trauma echo. Here's the most unsettling part. We've built entire industries on this dysfunction. Self-help empires, spiritual workshops, pop psychology advice, all promising that you can finally attract unconditional love if you just heal enough, give enough, become enough. And so the cycle continues. You feel unloved, you blame yourself, you try harder, you still don't feel safe. You conclude you're broken. But you are not broken. You are responding perfectly to a myth that was never meant to be lived. This isn't just about romantic relationships. This is about the quiet epidemic of emotional starvation. The way people wander through life wearing smiles that cost too much. The way we perform love instead of living it. The way we stay in cages and call them commitments. Because here's the truth no one wants to say. Unconditional love, as we imagine it, is not the highest form of love. It's a fantasy, a longing for a kind of safety the world cannot provide. And the more we chase it, the further we drift from love that is honest, mutual, and alive. So what now? If this myth is harming us, shaping our psyches, relationships, and cultural norms in destructive ways, how do we rebel? Is there a way to love deeply without becoming a martyr? To stay connected without dissolving? To be human, flawed, and still worthy? Not of unconditional love, but something better? That's where we go next. Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out over everything you've ever called love. Your childhood memories, your family dynamics, your past relationships, your unspoken expectations. And you begin to realize none of it was unconditional. Not truly, not purely. And that's not a tragedy. It's a doorway. Because here's the first radical truth. You don't need unconditional love. You need reciprocity. You need boundaries. You need consent, curiosity, accountability, and respect. You need love that breathes, not love that demands your silence. The rebellion begins when you stop romanticizing what never actually loved you back. You've been taught to aspire to love like a deity, to forgive endlessly, to give without asking, to expect nothing, even when your soul was starving. But what if divinity wasn't in self-sacrifice, but in self-honoring? Let's shatter this illusion together. The shift from worship to awareness, the first step in breaking free is awareness, not of others, but of your own complicity in the cycle. Ask yourself, who taught me that love was something I had to earn? When did I learn to ignore my needs to preserve a connection? How many times have I called endurance loyalty when it was really fear? This rebellion doesn't start with revenge or rejection. It starts with radical inner honesty. It asks you to name the contracts you've signed in silence. The family contract. Be the fixer, the forgiver, the one who never complains. The romantic contract. Swallow your needs, stay small, make their happiness your job. The cultural contract. Don't make people uncomfortable. Don't break the illusion. Break those contracts. Rewrite them. Say aloud. Love without truth is not love. Love without limits is not sacred. It is unsustainable. Scroll the philosophical turn. Love is a choice, not a sentence. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us of the tyranny of moral absolutes. He challenged the ideal of pure virtues, urging us to embrace a more grounded, human truth, that love, like all things, is shaped by power, desire, and struggle. To Nietzsche, love is not holy. It is not perfect. It is willful. It is an act of becoming. And most importantly, it is finite. That's what makes it real. In loving relationships, the power lies not in unconditionality, but in mutual choice, the daily decision to return to one another with care and freedom. Aldous Huxley, too, saw the danger in idealizing false absolutes. He warned that when society clings to illusions of perfect love or perfect order, it creates mechanisms of control. The ideal becomes a weapon. We see this today in how religion, media, and even psychology often present unconditional love as a moral high ground. But the truth? Love is never pure. It's messy. It's inconsistent. It's a dance of shadows and light. And that's not failure. That's humanity. The psychological flip. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. They are proof of it. Carl Jung believed that true love could only arise when individuals had faced their shadows. Until then, what we call love is projection, trying to merge with someone who represents our lost pieces. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation only happens when you stop playing roles, when you stop pretending, when you begin saying things like, 'I love you, and I won't stay if this continues. I care deeply, and I will not betray myself to prove it. I am here, but not at the cost of my truth.' That's not conditional. That's conscious. That's love that knows itself." Compass historical rebels of the heart. Think of Harriet Tubman. She didn't unconditionally love the system. She didn't stay. She loved her people fiercely, and that love compelled her to rebel, to escape, to defy. Or Maya Angelou, who wrote of love that survives by being awake. Her love wasn't passive. It was filled with fire and clarity. Or Bell Hooks, who told us that love is an action, not just a feeling. That to love truly is to will the good of another and of oneself. That without justice, without boundaries, love collapses into manipulation. These were not women who tolerated everything. They were women who said, love must be free and freedom demands limits. Brain cognitive rewiring. Choosing your new story now. Let's talk science. Your brain is plastic, which means it can rewire its emotional default settings. If you've spent your life chasing unavailable love or offering yourself as a sacrifice, your neural pathways have been shaped by scarcity, not truth. But neuroplasticity means that with intention, you can change your love map. Here's how rebellion looks on a neurological level. You recognize that love equals suffering is a belief, not a fact. You build new connections through relationships that honor your no as much as your yes. You learn to sit with discomfort without self-abandoning. You practice interdependence, not codependence, not hyper-independence, but mutual flow. Each time you say no to what harms you, you say yes to your nervous system. Each time you pause before overgiving, you reteach your body what safety feels like. Rebellion is repatterning, not rejecting love, but rebuilding it with different scaffolding. Lightbulb practices of the rebellious heart here are practices to begin your shift. Sacred boundaries. Write down 3 things you will no longer tolerate in the name of love. Speak them aloud. Post them somewhere visible. Relational audit. Examine your closest relationships. Which ones feed your truth? Which ones drain it? Make conscious choices, even small ones, to invest where your soul can breathe. Unlearn and relearn. Read work that dismantles the myth. Bell Hooks, Esther Pearl, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Pema Chodron. Let new language reshape your expectations. Mirror ritual. Stand before a mirror and say, I am worthy of love with limits. I do not have to disappear to be held. Love is a verb. Ask yourself daily, how can I love without losing myself? Then act on it, even in the smallest ways. This rebellion is not loud at first. It begins in whispers. In the moment you say, actually no. In the moment you walk away, even though part of you wants to stay. In the moment you let go of a fantasy and grieve the dream of being unconditionally loved by someone who cannot meet you in reality. Rebellion is mourning the myth, and then choosing what is real. And what is real? Love that requires your whole presence, not your perfection. Love that evolves, that apologizes, that respects your no. Love that isn't everything, but is enough. So here we stand, on the ashes of the old myth. Not jaded, not bitter, but reborn. And now comes the most powerful truth of all, the realization that will not only change how you love others, but how you finally love yourself. You sit alone, perhaps in the quiet of your room, perhaps walking beneath the bruised blue of an evening sky, and suddenly a question whispers itself through your bones. If love isn't unconditional, then what am I still waiting for? This is the moment when the myth dies, and something far more sacred begins to breathe. You are not broken for needing love. You are not foolish for having wanted it without limits, but you are ready now for something truer. And here it is, the final, most powerful realization. You were never meant to receive unconditional love from others. You were meant to become the source of it for yourself, not as a backup plan, not as a consolation prize, but because that is the only love that liberates rather than binds, that roots rather than entraps, that heals rather than haunts. Milky Way, the collapse of the waiting room. All your life, you've been waiting in a room without clocks, where time feels sticky and suspended. You've been waiting for someone to choose you without hesitation, to understand you without explanation, to stay without needing reasons. But here's the thing about that room. It never unlocks from the outside. No one can enter it unless you let yourself out. Because unconditional love, as we've been sold it, is often just another name for emotional dependency dressed as virtue. It says, I am nothing unless someone proves me otherwise. But what if you are already something? What if the key was never about being loved by others without conditions, but about unlearning the conditions you placed on loving yourself? The inner war, projection versus integration. Carl Jung called it the inner marriage, the moment when we stop projecting our unloved parts onto others and start reclaiming them. That ache you feel when someone withholds affection, that's not just about them. That's your inner child, frozen in a pose of waiting, still hoping someone will come back and finally say, you were always enough. But here's the turning point. You can be the one who says it. You don't need their voice. You need your own. You stop saying, why won't they love me the way I need? What I have to do to be worthy? If I change, maybe they'll stay. And you start saying, I see my hunger. I honor it, but I won't feed it crumbs anymore. I can love myself and still long for connection, but I won't sacrifice one for the other. Their inability to love me fully does not prove I am unlovable. It proves they're limited, and so am I. This is not arrogance. It's sovereignty. Compass the end of the illusion. You are not a love object. The myth of unconditional love wants you to be an object. Passive, soft, forgiving, always there. But you are not a love object. You are a love subject. With agency, with limits, with the power to choose. When you reclaim your subjectivity, something strange happens. You stop trying to be lovable, and you start being real. You laugh too loud. You say the hard thing. You walk away when staying would mean erasing yourself. You let your weirdness live, and suddenly, love, real love, becomes possible. Not perfect, not permanent, but human, and holy because of it. The brain, the body, and the rewiring of worth neuroscience backs this up. Your sense of self-worth is not static. It's built through repetition and response. Every time you choose to self-soothe instead of self-abandon. Every time you speak a boundary instead of swallowing it. Every time you sit with your loneliness instead of rushing into someone else's arms just to escape. Your brain rewires. Your nervous system recalibrates. Your body begins to trust you more than it trusts the next text, the next hug, the next validation. And in that trust, you find a quiet miracle. You stop performing for love. You start embodying it. Sparkles the sacred shift. From seeking love to being love. Here is the final, most counterintuitive, most liberating idea of all. Love is not something you find. Love is something you become, not by being perfect, not by earning it, but by remembering that your existence is already a form of love. When you stand in your truth, you are loving. When you grieve what hurt you without becoming bitter, you are loving. When you extend compassion without losing your spine, you are loving. When you walk away from what drains you, you are loving. And in that state, you stop asking, will they love me unconditionally? And you start asking, is this connection aligned with the love I already embody? This flips the script forever. You are no longer a seeker. You are a sovereign. You are no longer hungry. You are whole. Clapperboard the cinematic ending. A new love story begins. Picture it. You wake up one morning, not with butterflies, but with clarity. You no longer chase the people who once made you feel temporarily alive. You no longer beg love to return in its most diluted form. You smile at your own reflection, not because you're flawless, but because you're free. The world didn't change. People still disappoint. Love is still hard. But you are no longer asleep inside the myth. You have rewritten the story. You have chosen presence over performance, boundaries over blind devotion, integrity over illusion. And you realize, this is not the end of love. This is the beginning of real love. The kind that includes conditions, but not control. The kind that says, I will meet you as I am, and you may choose to stay or not, but I will never leave myself again. And in that final act, you find it. Not unconditional love, but something better. Unshakable love, liberated love. Love that starts with you and radiates out like a revolution.